All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to be here. Today we will be discussing operationalizing AI governance in insurance. Quick introduction, my name is Andrew Gamino-Cheong. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Trustible. We do a lot of work on actually operationalizing AI governance. And we're joined today by three incredible leaders in insurance companies to speak a little bit about some of their experiences and give us some information about basically the scope of what AI governance and insurance looks like, the scope of the landscape, and a couple of insights based on some of their own experiences. Quick disclaimer, while everyone here is a leader in the insurance space, everyone is here speaking in a personal capacity and not necessarily representing their organizations. To kick this off, we'll have each of our participants introduce themselves, and we'll just go quickly in order here, Ellie, Tamra, and Chantel.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So my name is Ellie Nieves, and I'm Vice President and Assistant General Counsel for Strategic Public Policy Initiatives at the Guardian Life Insurance Company. And as you mentioned, I am here in my personal capacity today. And I work in legislative and regulatory affairs focused on emerging technology issues.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamra Moore. I'm Vice President Corporate Counsel at Prudential Financial, where I focus primarily on AI governance, risk assessment, and regulatory compliance. And as Ellie noted, and I will reiterate here, the opinions expressed during this webinar are mine and mine own, and do not reflect Prudential's opinions or views on any of the issues discussed.
Chantel, use you for a second. Well, we can go ahead and continue. Chantel might be encountering a technical blip here. But to kick us off, I think it's really useful for everyone to have some context on this in terms of what is the state of AI regulation within insurance. There's been existing laws, a lot of stuff in the news, but maybe just to set some context here. Maybe before that, Chantel, if you wanted to quickly introduce.
Sorry, can you hear me now? I'm having some technical difficulties. Hello, Chantel, also here as an individual. I work at Nationwide Insurance. My role is statistical modeling and AI machine learning ethicist. I do come from a data science background, so I sit within our advanced analytics team, and I mostly work on operationalizing responsible AI and other kinds of modeling into our analytics, but I also then liaison out to the enterprise and support risk management, legal compliance, bringing analytics expertise to those spaces as well.
Awesome. Thank you to all three of you for joining us today. We're excited, especially since we've got a combination of some more legal and some more technical roles here. So to go back to what I was briefly mentioning, maybe Ellie, you could give us a quick overview on just what the current state of regulations are, particularly around AI within the insurance space.
Sure, thank you, Andrew. And I would like to provide some backdrop on what has led to the current AI regulatory activity in the life insurance space. Just like many other industries, life insurance is undergoing rapid change due to innovation. And artificial intelligence is an important tool that can benefit the industry and the customers that we serve by improving operational efficiencies and preventing fraud, and also increasing access to financial services. And for the most part, I would argue that the life insurance industry is in the early stages of AI adoption as compared to other industries. And recent events and accounts of artificial intelligence gone wrong in other industries have led insurance regulators to take a proactive regulatory stance to ensure that those accounts don't become part of the life insurance industry's story. Insurance regulators have focused their efforts on regulating insurer use of external consumer data and information sources that may be used in underwriting and insurance practices. We've heard that policymakers are concerned that those external consumer data sources, even if they're predictive in their value, can unintentionally lead to unfair discrimination against protected classes. So good example is a data input that might otherwise appear neutral can potentially serve as a proxy for race in the same way that zip codes served as a proxy for race in redlining during mortgage transactions. So these concerns have led to regulatory activity in various states. I'll start with New York. In 2019, the New York State Department of Financial Services released Circular Letter 1, declaring that insurers need to justify the use of external data sources and models in life insurance underwriting. And in January of this year, they released a new draft circular letter that incorporates responsible AI best practices. And that circular letter is open for comment until March 17th. In 2020, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, that's also known as the NAIC, which is a standard-setting body made up of all 50 state insurance commissioners and the U.S. territories, released artificial intelligence principles and created various work streams to address unintentional bias in insurance algorithms. And late last year, the NAIC adopted a model bulletin on the use of artificial intelligence systems by insurers. And to date, the model bulletin has been adopted by the states of Alaska, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. In 2021, Connecticut released a notice reminding all insurers of their obligations to not discriminate against protected classes, and that the use of external data is subject to the state's Unfair Trade Practices Act. And lastly, I'll mention the state of Colorado, which in 2022 became the first state to create a regulatory regime, which is currently under development, and it requires insurers to test external data sources used in insurance practices for racial bias. Since insurance is regulated at the state level, these individual state regulatory actions is really leading to a bit of a patchwork, but there are some common threads in the regulatory activity, primarily in establishing in-house governance frameworks for responsible AI, and is very helpful for companies who are just starting to delve into this space.
Awesome. Thank you for that fantastic overview. To dive into a couple of those specifically that are kind of imminent, maybe Tamra, could you kind of walk us through a little bit of some of the requirements of that Colorado regulation? I believe it was finalized towards the end of last year, at least part of it in terms of the risk management system. But what are some of the key things that were in that regulation that you all are looking at?
Sure. So as Ellie mentioned, Colorado issued a regulation that became final in November of 2023 that applies to life insurers that are licensed to do business in the state of Colorado. It applies to both the life insurance business and insurance practices. And insurance practices can include everything from marketing, reimbursement methodology, you name it. I mean, basically any of the supporting functions of an individual, and I should say it's individual life insurance practice or business. What the regulation requires are basically establishing a governance framework for the life insurer's use of external consumer data and information sources and or models, algorithms that use that same type of data. And it requires both policies and procedures that govern, for example, the monitoring and ongoing monitoring of models and data, the acquisition of external consumer data and information sources from third parties, and or models that you're requiring that contain that same information. It requires the establishment of a cross-functional team that basically has oversight over the sort of day-to-day use and development of external consumer data and information sources and models. And it also includes a requirement that life insurers that are using third-party vendor data and or models have in place a due diligence, a robust due diligence framework for assessing the vendor's products, whether that's data or models that contain that form of data. So it's, basically it is requiring a robust AI governance framework and program that applies to individual life insurance, and then also the supporting functions such as marketing, claims reimbursement, et cetera.
Awesome. Really appreciate that overview. And there's this focus that both of you mentioned in this Colorado law on these external consumer data sources and information sources, or ECDIS. Maybe Chantel, could you talk a little bit more, and Ellie touched on this, about why this focus on it? What are some of the different ways that bias can manifest in there? And maybe just talk a little bit about, why this focus in there that's popping up in several places.
Yeah, I think that Ellie actually said it very nicely, which is that we want to be careful that we're not accidentally capturing information via a proxy relationship that we don't want within our models. That's the primary concern. I would say, I think it may be a secondary concern why external data is that this is often data that consumers themselves are not directly giving over to companies. And so there's an additional caution there. Being that it is external to the company. I think Ellie said it actually very nicely. Like, it's, there's a historical relationship between race and some other things in the world, not a surprise. And we just want to be very careful that we're understanding that relationship within our variables and only including those that we want.
Yeah, and there's plenty of discussion about other, internet sources of data being used for AI purposes elsewhere, and some of the different risks and harms can come from that, even in some of these other models. To dive in and talk maybe about, Ellie, you mentioned the NAIC model bulletin. What exactly is a model bulletin? Is that law? Is that advice? Is that guidance? What kind of happens after a group like the NAIC proposes such a thing?
So one of the important functions of the NAIC is to set standards for the insurance industry. And one way that they do that is through the development of model bulletins and regulations that states can adopt. Before the models become final, they are refined through a stakeholder process, a very rigorous stakeholder process that includes regulators, insurers, consumer advocates, and other interested parties. And the rigorous stakeholder process leads to the development of these model bulletins, and often leads to a level of comfort in states adopting those models as formal regulatory guidance. So at the NAIC level, those bulletins serve more as standards and not as binding regulatory guidance. But when the state adopts it formally, it does become formal regulatory guidance, and it is binding on companies that do business in the state where the bulletin is adopted. So as I mentioned before, the NAIC adopted a model bulletin on AI, and Alaska, New Hampshire, and Connecticut have already adopted the bulletin, and we expect to see additional states adopt the model as we progress in 2024.
And how do you stay on top of this? Because it seems like there's obviously so much news coming out about different regulations on AI. There's stuff coming out of the state level, the federal level. For some groups, obviously, there's the big concern from the AI Act. There's executive orders, again, at the state and federal level. How are some of you guys staying on top of all these developments, working on top of that, just to even stay abreast of all the updates in this space?
So I'll just mention it's part of my day job, right? I track legislative and regulatory activity for advocacy purposes. I also follow thought leaders in the space on LinkedIn. Trustible is actually one of those thought leaders. Thank you so much for all of the good work that you're currently doing in the space. And I also rely on good old-fashioned Google alerts on AI governance.
Awesome.
I'll just add, I basically do the same as Ellie. And I'd also add that we work closely with our external affairs team, who are also keeping track of not just state and federal level AI regulation, but also, in addition to that, privacy and other issues that may impact the life insurance business.
Yeah. Gold stars all around for Nationwide's external affairs team. They're fantastic and great partner in this space. I remember when I started my graduate school program, and I thought, who could read this much in a day? And I think that it's like the gauntlet was laid down and challenging. So it's a lot of reading, and particularly now with just the massive amount of activity in this space. Relying really on those trusted partners, setting aside quiet time to make sure that you can really read and get into the details of all of the activity, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, so actually some of that cross-team collaboration is one of the key themes on actual operationalization of AI governance. So to move into that as kind of a broad topic, who are some of the other stakeholders who need to be involved with AI governance, either from the regulations, from some of your own experiences, like who are the key people that need to be at that table, part of these working groups? Who are some of the groups that are really leading some of these efforts? Maybe we can start with you, Tamra, on, who are some people you're regularly working with on these issues?
Sure. So I would say that there are people from the legal team, of course, risk management, the data science team, HR may be involved to some extent. Basically, I would say that anybody who has some either hands-on role with respect to life insurance, individual life insurance models, or the use of external consumer data and information sources would have some, would want to be part of the table at discussing these issues. And so that is generally, within those sort of like broad groups, you might drill down depending on what the types of issues are. But for the most part, it's, risk management, legal, the individual life insurance business partners, also, to the extent if it's marketing partners, there's a lot of people who have an interest and stake in the development of these tools.
I'll just add a few. Those are all partners that we are, constantly collaborating with here at Nationwide. And I don't want to take us into Gen AI too soon if we're going there eventually. But as we're moving into, more technical space, like IT, is also a big player for the Gen AI space, innovation. So those are some of our partners as well, in addition to the ones that Tamra mentioned.
Yeah.
And I would add the data analysts. They're central to the conversations that we have. And it's really awesome when we are able to have that cross-collaborative diversity of thought type of conversation and see how everybody comes at an issue from their different angles. And it's probably the one thing that I find is where collaboration is not a nice to do, it's actually required in this space. You can't make good decisions in this space without having everybody at the table looking at it from different angles.
Yeah. Maybe picking up on that point, because there is so much discussion of risk management, right? And of core focus of the NAIC bulletin, the Colorado law is setting up a risk management system. How are some of the different ways that your different teams are thinking about risk? When you hear risk, does that mean certain taxonomies of things, certain kinds of concerns? How are some of those different teams thinking about that and then collaborating together to make sure those risks are being properly mitigated? Maybe Chantel, we can start, from the technical point of view. When you hear risk, what are the first things that come to mind?
Yeah, I think that risk is like this. It's so central and so interesting. And the way we tackle it here at Nationwide, or certainly the way I tackle it here at Nationwide, is really like taking our top of the house, like North Star principles, and how do we make sure we're doing that, right? And so often my job is very technical. It's like, okay, well, is this performing? How is the model performing? Or what kind of data do we have? What's the quality of that data? And then all of that does link up to, we can talk about the NAIC principles or NIST there's principles all over the place that are, some fairly standard principles, and say, how do we ensure transparency? How do we ensure, quality data? And what does that look like for the work that's in front of me? So maybe that there are coding standards, maybe there are peer review standards, maybe there are risk management, tiered activities and processes that go for different risk activities. So all of those layers end up getting boiled down to like, what is the job in front of me, and how do I ensure that every day I'm aligned with the principles that my company stands for? And we work a lot to take those abstract principles and operationalize them down to specific activities in front of specific people. I think that's the task, right, is to figure that out.
Maybe Tamra, what do you think about when you hear the term risks? I'm guessing you're not thinking about code quality, maybe quite so much, but what does that mean to you?
So I think from my perspective, it is all of those things, and recognizing that obviously my wheelhouse is law, and understanding what the regulatory landscape looks like, not just with respect to AI legislation, but the use of data, privacy, federal and state anti-discrimination laws, and other, sort of best practices for a company in this space or in the financial services space. So, that might be my main lens, but I'm also trying to understand from all of the interested stakeholders that are at the table, understanding what their role is and how any of that, all of the legal landscape may apply to what they're doing or best practices. So that's basically how I try to tackle it from my perspective. And I think that part of that is being a partnership with, the individuals who are at the table, and understanding that everyone has, a role to play, and has an expertise, but, we're all working towards a common mission. So.
Ellie, any thoughts from you on that front?
Sure. When I hear risk, I think about what would potentially invite regulatory scrutiny. Basically, because from where I sit, I'm engaging in regulatory and legislative advocacy and ensuring that we are functioning in a compliant way. And it's from where I sit, because I tend to hear the discussions before something becomes formalized. It's really important to know what the intent of a regulation is, and to be able to bring that back to my business partners. So even if something is not formalized, that we talked about the NAIC model bulletin, even if something is not yet formalized in a state, it's very important to understand what are the concerns driving the regulatory activity, and for companies to internalize that and understand what the concerns might potentially be, and to really have that soul-searching conversation internally and ask themselves, how do we want to show up in this space? And I think that's a regulatory expectation for companies to be proactive in developing their AI governance functions and not just wait for regulations to come down. And that is really the best way that we can partner with regulators. And when I hear the word risk, that's really what I think about. I think about not being in lockstep with regulators and with their concerns.
And I think some of that, and I'll just quickly add, is also trying to understand whether there are themes in existing regulation and legislation, whether that's, again, federal, state, global efforts to regulate the use of AI. And I think that is also a way to ensure that our, interested stakeholders remain on top of the issues as they're arising, because there are some themes across legislation that are important to note.
Well, and when we talk to a lot of groups, there's both sometimes carrot and stick incentives around this. And Ellie, to your point about being proactive, there can actually be more than just compliance and risk management reasons for AI governance. I'm curious, how you guys think about potentially the business value of AI governance, right? Beyond just going on some of the risk stuff. And Chantal, I think you joined us again. If you want to maybe kick off on that point and as well share it, follow up to the last one.
I mean, I will say that as an ethicist, our job is to go beyond compliance. Like, that is really the mandate. And I love what Tamra and Ellie were saying. And I think it circles back to Ellie's previous comment about how the diversity of the group is an essential component to this being successful, and how each of us bring our own charters, if you will, to what it is that the problems that we're trying to solve, and whatever our ultimate solutions are, how that solution, you can see the pieces of all of those relative stakeholders in that. And so, for me as an ethicist, obviously I'm supporting compliance, I'm supporting legal all the time, but I'm also trying to think about, like, well, what else? Not only what regulation is coming, but what else can we do to fulfill our mission better, more efficiently, all of those things. Again, always going back to our, North Star principles. So, I really appreciate the legal compliance, but I'm always like, and then what else? And what else can we do? Or what do we imagine might be coming later to just move us in the right direction?
Yeah, Tamra, what are your thoughts about the business value of good AI governance? Obviously, there's that compliance angle as well, but what comes to mind?
Well, for me, and I think to sort of echo what Chantel just said, is looking at your company's principles, values with respect to not just AI, but their customers and what their customers' expectations might be, and sort of grounding yourself in that. And so in my mind, AI governance is sort of part and parcel of a company's principles and values with respect to how they treat their customers and what their customers can expect from their products, and their interactions with the company. And so I think that AI governance is critical as part of a business proposition. It's important because without it, you sort of are missing the other pieces that are critical to your company's mission of putting out, whether it be good financial products, with disclosures that inform, customers what they can expect with respect to their data. All of that is important to sort of reinforce those, basic foundational principles.
And I'll echo what my colleagues have already shared. One definitely is risk mitigation. Effective AI governance really helps to mitigate the risks that are associated with AI systems by ensuring compliance with regulations and other industry standards. And from where I sit in the external affairs world, good AI governance also enhances trust. AI governance best practices really help us to build trust with our customers, with investors, and with regulators. And third, good AI governance can lead to operational efficiencies. I hear this all the time, right? It helps to streamline development, deployment, and also maintenance of AI systems by helping to establish clear guidelines and protocols to help companies reduce any errors and also to improve productivity.
I guess I would echo what Ellie just said with respect to, proposed model use cases and having the opportunity to discuss, what those parameters might be before, you have a fully developed tool ready for deployment. And so again, efficiencies, that it's something important to be there, at the moment that these ideas are conceived, to be able to talk through and mitigate some of the risks that may be associated with the development of a particular tool.
I always love that analogy that, cars couldn't go fast until there were brakes. And, I'm proudly a brake. I'm a brake in the system, but I'm doing my job so that other people can go fast and reduce dangers.
Yeah, that's a common thing that we hear around the value of building trust and being able to actually show that you're staying on top of things. And there's one industry that probably knows how to measure the business value of risk management, it's definitely going to be insurance. To move on to maybe our last subject, talking about a couple of the trends within the AI space, and just to get some high-level thoughts, or even just to share some informational content about it. And for anybody online, if you have any questions or clarifications you would like, go ahead and post those in the comments so we can try and address those before the end. The first one is obviously, everyone is talking about generative AI. Many of the regulations that we've talked about at the beginning of this actually were initially drafted or were beginning before kind of this era of hype around generative AI. But I'm kind of just curious to understand from your own points of view, is generative AI actually new for the purposes of what you're thinking about, and without going into too much details on what your orgs are doing? Is this something that actually needs to be handled differently, or is it really iterative on top of what's already going on? Maybe Chantel, we can start with you.
Yeah, I come from data science, so for us, generative, we knew about this a long time ago. It existed a long time ago, so it's not new to me or a lot of my peers. But there is a newness and accessibility. I am avoiding democratization on purpose because I think we should, talk that out as a society a little more, like what does that actually mean for something to be democratized. But it is certainly more accessible. It's prevalent. It's trendy. Maybe it's maybe this is a moment in time and we move on, or maybe this is a moment that everything turns sharp left. But I think what is important is that we identify what are actual new different risks around this generative AI today, as it exists today, not 2 or 3 years ago. And does our current system have what it takes to mitigate and remediate those new or amplified risks? And if not, let's move that way. So I'm like a buzzkill. I'm like, don't believe the hype. This is not an all brand new, story here. There are some new pieces and we can figure that out together. I would say that the quantity of activity is really, at least in my experience, unprecedented. So that is certainly something that is new, but it isn't, how is that a new risk? And what are the other new, technical risks? I think those are still open questions that we're solving. So that's sort of my take. Thanks.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I think that I'm going to support what Chantel said earlier about sometimes you have to go slow in order to move fast. And it's definitely not something that's new for experts like Chantel, but for the average everyday employee sitting in a corporate office, it's new, it's exciting, and everybody wants to use it. But corporations, it's up to the companies to actually say, well, no, you can't use it just yet. We have to figure this out. We need to understand what the benefits and the risks are and put policies around it, and perhaps set up systems where employees actually have to ask for permission to use these types of tools. And then we have to vet whether these tools are valuable at this stage in the game, or just say no use until we figure it out. And then we'll roll out more stringent policies on how they could be used. So I think it's still a tricky world around generative AI, and we still have a lot to learn.
Yeah. Tamra, any thoughts?
I mean, no, I can't add anything to what Chantel and Ellie both said. I think they hit the nail on the head with respect to trying to understand what the risks are before you just jump in both feet, and understanding, how basically incremental steps are good, in a situation where you're trying to figure out the landscape and understand the technology, but also not stymie innovation.
Yeah. Maybe kind of related to that, one of the other transformations isn't just the generative AI aspect, but the fact that there's now so much third-party AI, and probably a lot of people have seen AI popping up in tools that they didn't realize needed or should have AI, and that can be a fight on its own. I'm kind of curious to just hear, how are some of the evolving regulatory frameworks tackling, vendor AI, the fact that stuff can pop up anywhere? How are you thinking about that and tackling that on its own? And maybe Tamra, we can start with you.
Sure. Well, from the regulatory landscape, regulators are very interested in companies' use of third-party tools, data, to the extent that those tools and data are being used in a company's individual life insurance business or practice. And so from a regulatory standpoint, the key is, are the companies with whom you're contracting, do they have robust governance procedures in place? Are they, monitoring their own products and tools and, for bias, accuracy, drift, et cetera, and ensuring that you feel comfortable when you are procuring a tool or data that, this company has done its own due diligence, the vendor, I should say, before they just released data or a tool for use. And so that is, from a regulatory standpoint, kind of the focus is, they want to, I think that regulators want to see that companies that they are regulating, and that's not just insurance. I would say that this is probably across, various different industries, are conducting due diligence. Not enough to just say, I purchased it and, the onus is on the vendor if anything goes wrong, you've made an intentional decision to purchase a tool and to use it in a way that, potentially may impact, consumers, patients, clients, whoever. And it's important that you ensure that when you're using it, you understand the full scope of what it does, how it acts, and, any potential limitations on use and things like that.
Yeah. Chantel, any thoughts on you? Anytime you're hearing about maybe third-party models or other vendor things, how are those being thought about or addressed?
I'm just grateful for the team of folks here who handle our third-party risk, because it is a unique risk. Tamra pointed out some of the areas that, are unique. You don't have as much transparency necessarily. You're relying sometimes on what feels like incomplete or insufficient information. There's trust, that's required. Of course, I come from data science analytics, so I always would prefer for us to build everything. I know that that's not always, like the right answer, and it's certainly not the right answer for every company, but that is my own personal bias. Like, if we build it, we have control over the whole process. We have visibility into the whole process. We know that our rigorous risk management practices have been followed. When we can't do that, then we're really relying on those, contractual lawyers, procurement, the third-party risk folks to really do their job well. But it always makes me a little bit nervous.
And from where I sit, from an external affairs perspective, the NAIC just recently launched a working group that's focused on third-party vendor management, simply because there are some new issues that are arising as a result of third-party vendors. Many companies don't have the in-house capabilities to build out models, and they're relying on these external third parties to be able to, leverage their expertise in certain areas. But many of those vendors have trade secrets. So in conducting our due diligence, are we running afoul of their trade secrets? What is appropriate due diligence that will survive regulatory muster? And the NAIC is recognizing that, and they've launched this important working group that's going to be addressing a lot of these issues moving forward. And we look forward to hearing where they land.
It's something we encounter a lot, where sometimes the very data used to train these models that are being sold is considered a trade secret, but many of the risks comes directly from what data was used to generate these. We've had a couple of questions come in. I'm going to try and grab a couple of them combined into some kind of final thoughts. The first one is really about like the team culture, building a team culture of ethics around that, making sure that things aren't just a check the box exercise. I'd love any thoughts any of you have about like almost advice that you would give to maybe an earlier version of yourself, or especially to other organizations that are just starting out on this journey. How do you make sure that you actually build this culture and ethics and the education around that? And Chantel, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would love to go first on this. I spent actually the bulk of last year with a working group of business leaders in Ohio, like on building a data ethics culture. I think that it's critically important. I would give some quick advice, like both top down and bottom up. So, grassroots endeavors, as well as top down messaging process, alignment, strategic alignment. But really also the bottom up, like have, book clubs and conversations, and identify key allies in your organization, folks who are passionate about this, and find ways to engage those folks. I think culture, that's how this gets done well. It's all undergirded by the culture. And so that would be my recommendation. Both top down and bottom up stuff, identify allies, keep folks engaged. And of course, I'm always reading. So read bunches of stuff.
I will support everything that Chantel said. And I will add to that is ensuring that there are open lines of communication with leadership within the organization. The leadership understanding what's happening in the regulatory space, and to the comment that I made earlier about not just seeing the regulation come to pass and be final, but understanding what led to the regulation, that intricate conversation and stakeholder process that occurred in preparation for that regulation to be finalized, or those models to be finalized, are super important, because we should be building out as those conversations are occurring, not just waiting for them to end.
And maybe as a final kind of takeaway, again, going back to for somebody who might be in a similar role to yours, who's just starting out on this journey, either because they're new at their organization, new to AI governance or something, based on your own understanding of some of the challenges, complexities, landscape, what is some advice you would give to some of those people within your own kind of context? Maybe Tamra, we can start with you.
Sure. So I will say that I am still that person. I feel like this is, an ongoing learning experience. And so being willing to sit and talk with your business partners and data science team to understand what they do and how they do it. I think, webinars like this one are helpful, and just really being willing to continually learn because the technology is changing so quickly and the capabilities are also changing. And it's just, I think, giving yourself a little grace and understanding you're not going to know everything, across all of the different functions that sort of support an AI governance program. But being willing to roll up your sleeves and try to understand and to learn and being committed to that process, I think, is the most important.
Just a quick follow-up, any recommended sources for that education, things that you found yourself useful?
Well, sure. So, webinars, white papers are very useful. LinkedIn is wonderful in the sense that people are posting helpful content all the time. And so I try to, keep on top of that. I think that there's information out there from a variety of different sources. And if you're interested in learning, it's out there and it's, pretty easy to tap into.
Awesome. Chantel, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I would say that someone gave me the advice when I first got into this space, and it was like, figure out what area interests you. And so it's a really big landscape. Do you like risk management? Do you like policy? Do you like analytics? Like what gets you excited? What are your core strengths? And lean into that. So if you're not a data scientist, there's still a place for you. If you're not a lawyer, there's still a place for you. I came out of advocacy work and found myself in a data science role, and now those two worlds are coming together and I feel really excited. So, I think that there is a space for everyone. It can be really overwhelming in the beginning to feel like you don't have the competency to play over here. That's absolutely not true. I think take your time to understand the space, figure out what you're interested in, what gets you excited, because you're going to be doing a lot of reading in that area. And then to Tamra's point, like, keep learning, lean into people. If your company doesn't have a role or an organization or a committee that you can be a part of, like, figure out how to bring responsible AI or ethics into your role. Like, what can I do to do my job better? Where can I find opportunities to have this conversation with my peers? And next thing you know, you're leading. So I really think that it's wide open and it's for everyone.
Absolutely. I'll echo Chantel. Find your lane and stick to it. There's so much work in the AI space and so much perspective that you can add. For me, regulatory and legislative affairs is a clear lane and a clear pathway for me. It's my background, and clearly there's a lot of activity in an area that's just developing. And once you find your lane, find out how you can incorporate yourself into the conversation and add value to others who are currently working in different areas of the space. Make sure that you're always adding value, always providing perspective, and serving in partnership.
Yeah, I love that advice. One of the most common things we hear is that the more people involved, the better it can be, mainly because some of the risks and biases that can seep into these systems can only be identified sometimes when you have a diverse group participating. So we're right up on time, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for a fantastic discussion. And best of luck on everyone in navigating some of these challenges in AI governance and the regulatory environment. So thank you so much. All right, have a great rest of your day, everyone.